The security guard pulled me aside and said, "Walk out now. Don't use the elevators tonight. The cables have been tampered with. All 3 elevators. Don't ask me how I know. Just trust me." Kevin Torres grabbed my wrist. His security guard uniform wrinkled like he'd been running. Fear radiated from him in waves that made my stomach clench. Behind us, the soft ding of an elevator arriving echoed through the empty 14th floor, but nobody had pressed the call button. Nobody else was supposed to be on this floor at 11:30 p.m. Kevin's face went white as the doors slid open to reveal Councilman Richard Blackstone himself, along with 2 men in expensive suits who moved like they'd killed people for money. I pulled out my phone to call building maintenance, but Kevin knocked it from my hands. The screen cracked against the marble floor. No calls, no texts. They're monitoring everything. His voice was barely a whisper as Blackstone stepped out of the elevator, scanning the empty floor like he owned it, which he did. "Kevin, everything all right up here?" Blackstone's voice was smooth, political, but his eyes were cold as they flicked between us. The man owned this building, owned half the commercial real estate in the city, and somehow knew exactly where to find a security guard who wasn't supposed to be making rounds on a decommissioned floor. Kevin straightened up, trying to look professional. "Just checking on some electrical issues, sir. This gentleman was helping me locate the source of the problem." The lie rolled off his tongue easily, but I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the building's aggressive air conditioning. Blackstone smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Electrical issues? On a floor that's been decommissioned for 3 weeks?" He stepped closer, and the 2 suits flanked him like bodyguards. "Sir, I don't believe we've met. I know everyone who works in my building." I managed to find my voice. "Marcus Dalton. I work for Meridian Analytics on the 9th floor." My hands were shaking, and I shoved them in my pockets to hide it. The laptop bag on my shoulder suddenly felt heavier, loaded with months of research that had seemed routine until this moment. "Meridian Analytics." Blackstone repeated the name slowly, like he was filing it away for later. "The data consulting firm. Processing municipal contracts, analyzing spending patterns. Very thorough work." The way he said it made my blood run cold. We'd been finding irregularities in city construction projects. Massive cost overruns that all seemed to benefit the same small circle of contractors. One of the suits stepped forward. "Sir, we should probably get going. The meeting starts in 20 minutes. His voice had the flat tone of someone who'd done this kind of work before. Military, security, something that involved making problems disappear permanently. Blackstone nodded, but didn't move. "Mr. Dalton, I hope you found what you were looking for. And Kevin, thank you for being so diligent about those electrical issues. I'll make sure to mention your dedication to building management." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Kevin's jaw tightened, but he nodded like a good employee. After they got back in the elevator and the doors closed, Kevin grabbed my arm again. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they realize you work on the team that's been digging into their contracts. You need to disappear. Tonight." He was already walking toward the stairwell, practically dragging me with him. "Those spreadsheets you've been analyzing show that Blackstone has been stealing millions from the city through fraudulent contracts, and now he knows you exist." Kevin stopped at the stairwell door, his keycard trembling in his hand. 3 months ago, another analyst from your company started asking similar questions. Thomas Chen from the Municipal Audit Division. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Thomas Chen had been found dead in his apartment 2 weeks ago. Apparent suicide, according to the police report. But he'd been working on the same contracts I was analyzing. The same patterns of fraud and corruption that kept me up at night, wondering if I was seeing things that weren't there. "Thomas didn't kill himself," Kevin said, reading my expression. "And neither will you if you're smart." We started down the stairs quickly, our footsteps echoing in the concrete stairwell. Kevin pulled out a small USB drive from his pocket. "Thomas gave me this before he died. Security footage from this building showing meetings between Blackstone and city officials, money changing hands, contracts being altered after they were signed." My laptop bag felt like it was full of dynamite now. "Why didn't you go to the police with this?" Kevin laughed bitterly. "Half the police department gets their holiday bonuses from Blackstone's charity foundation. The other half have family members working construction jobs on his projects. Thomas tried going through official channels first. Look how that worked out for him." Voices were coming from below, multiple people climbing up toward us, their footsteps synchronized like a tactical team. Kevin stopped at the 7th floor landing and listened carefully. "Fire exit," he whispered, pushing open a door marked, "Emergency exit only alarm will sound." No alarm sounded. "The alarm system's been disabled. Blackstone had it shut off last week for maintenance. Very convenient timing." We stepped out onto a narrow metal fire escape that zigzagged down the side of the building. The November air was bitter cold, and the metal grating was slick with frost. Below us, I could see 2 black SUVs parked in the alley behind the building. Men in suits were standing beside them, talking into radios and looking up at the building like they were coordinating a manhunt. "Change of plans. We're going up, not down." Kevin started climbing toward the roof, moving fast for a man in his 50s. "There's a building-to-building bridge on the 15th floor. Connects to the parking garage across the street." The metal fire escape groaned under our weight as we climbed higher. Behind us I could hear the stairwell door on the 7th floor slamming open, voices calling out instructions in the kind of professional shorthand that cops and military used. How long have you known about this? I asked as we reached the 10th floor, my breath coming in visible puffs in the cold air. 6 months. I've been documenting everything, taking photos, recording conversations, but I needed someone with access to the financial records to put together the complete picture. He paused on the landing, breathing hard. Thomas was supposed to be that person. When he died, I thought it was over. Then your team took over the audit and started finding the same patterns. We reached the 15th floor, and Kevin used a key card to open another door. Inside was an enclosed bridge connecting to the building across the street, glass walls showing the city spread out below us like a circuit board. The lights were off, but street lights provided enough illumination to navigate. There's something else, Kevin said as we crossed the bridge. Blackstone isn't just stealing from the city. He's been using those construction projects to launder money for organized crime. The cost overruns aren't just fraud. They're a way to clean dirty money and make it look like legitimate municipal expenses. That explained the men in suits. They weren't just corporate security. They were professional criminals with a very expensive problem that needed to be eliminated quietly. We reached the parking garage and Kevin led me to a beat-up sedan on the 3rd level. My personal car. They won't be looking for this one. He handed me the keys and the USB drive. Drive to the FBI field office in Albany. Ask for Agent Rebecca Stone. Tell her Kevin Torres sent you and that you have the Blackstone files. Footsteps were echoing in the stairwell of the parking garage. They'd figured out where we'd gone, and they were moving fast. What about you? I asked, but I already knew the answer from his expression. Someone needs to buy you time to get out of the city. I'm going back to work my shift like nothing happened. Kevin's smile was sad and resigned. I've got 23 years with this company. Pension kicks in next year, but some things are more important than retirement plans. Kevin pushed me toward the car and walked toward the stairwell, pulling out his radio like he was responding to a routine security call. I started the engine and drove toward the garage exit, hands shaking on the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, I could see Kevin talking to 3 men in suits, gesturing back toward the building like he was explaining a routine patrol. Professional, calm, buying me precious minutes with his life. The drive to Albany took 3 hours through winding mountain roads that were treacherous in the dark. I had to pull over twice to throw up from the stress and adrenaline. Each time, I sat in the car afterward, engine running, trying to process what had just happened to my quiet, boring life as a data analyst. Thomas Chen's death hadn't been suicide. He'd been murdered because he'd discovered the same patterns I'd been analyzing for months. Millions of dollars in fraudulent municipal contracts, money laundering for organized crime, a web of corruption that reached from City Hall to the police department. My phone had been destroyed back on the 14th floor, but Kevin's USB drive was burning a hole in my pocket. Evidence that men had died to protect. Evidence that could bring down one of the most powerful people in the city if it reached the right hands. The FBI field office in Albany was a nondescript building that looked more like a small-town bank than federal law enforcement headquarters. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, trying to work up the courage to walk inside. Once I did this, there would be no going back to my normal life. Agent Rebecca Stone was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with short red hair and the kind of intense focus that came from too much caffeine and too many late nights working federal cases. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally taking notes, her expression growing more serious with each detail. Kevin Torres, she said when I finished. We've been trying to get someone inside Blackstone's operation for 2 years. Torres was feeding us information, but nothing substantial enough to build a prosecution. Until now. She plugged Kevin's USB drive into her computer and spent 20 minutes reviewing the files. Security camera footage of briefcases full of cash being handed over in Blackstone's private office. Recorded phone calls discussing contract alterations and payment schedules. Email threads showing coordination between Blackstone, city officials, and construction companies. This is good. Very good. But we're going to need your research to connect these payments to the fraudulent contracts. The financial analysis showing how the money was laundered through municipal projects. I opened my laptop and pulled up months of spreadsheets, cost analyses, and trend reports. Together, we started building a comprehensive picture of how Richard Blackstone had been systematically stealing from the city while laundering money for organized crime. It was nearly sunrise when Agent Stone's phone rang. She answered it, listened for a moment, then hung up with a grim expression. Kevin Torres was found dead in his apartment an hour ago. Apparent heart attack. My hands went numb. Kevin had given his life to get me out of that building, and now he was dead. Another natural causes death that was anything but natural. We're putting you in protective custody immediately. Safe house outside the city until we can arrest everyone involved. With Torres dead, you're the only witness who can connect all these pieces. The reality hit me like a truck. I was the last person alive who could testify about what had happened in that building. The last person who could explain how Kevin had died trying to expose the truth. The safe house was a small apartment above a hardware store in a town called Millfield, population 3,200. 2 federal marshals took shifts watching me while I spent days refining my analysis and preparing testimony for the grand jury. The work was methodical, boring even, but every spreadsheet cell and every cost calculation was another nail in Blackstone's coffin. News of Kevin's death made the local papers. 56 years old, 23 years of faithful service, found dead of a heart attack in his apartment. The building management company issued a statement praising his dedication and expressing condolences to his family. No mention of any suspicious circumstances. No mention of the heroic thing he'd done to save a stranger's life. Thomas Chen's death had been ruled suicide. Kevin's death was a heart attack. If I'd been found dead in that elevator, it would have been a terrible accident involving tampered cables. 3 deaths that looked unrelated unless you knew the connection. Unless you understood that all 3 of us had been asking the wrong questions about the right people. Agent Stone visited twice a week to review our progress. The case was expanding beyond what anyone had initially imagined. Blackstone's scheme had tentacles reaching into state government, federal contracts, and criminal organizations across 3 states. What had started as municipal fraud was now a federal racketeering investigation involving millions of dollars and dozens of conspirators. We've arrested 6 people so far, Agent Stone told me during one visit. 2 city council members, a police captain, and 3 construction company executives. But Blackstone is still free. His lawyers are fighting the warrant, claiming it's based on illegally obtained evidence. The evidence Kevin had died to preserve was being challenged in court by expensive attorneys who specialized in making inconvenient truths disappear. But my financial analysis was solid, based on public records and standard auditing practices. They couldn't challenge the legitimacy of official municipal documents, even if they could question how we'd obtained Kevin's recordings. The numbers didn't lie, and the patterns were too obvious to ignore once you knew what to look for. The grand jury convened on a cold December morning. I testified for 3 hours, walking them through spreadsheets and cost analyses that showed millions of dollars in fraudulent charges. The foreman, a retired accountant, asked detailed questions that showed he understood exactly what Blackstone had been doing. How he'd inflated costs on legitimate projects to hide laundered money. How he'd created fake subcontractors to justify payments to criminal organizations. How he'd used municipal construction projects as a massive money-washing operation. The questions got harder as the day went on. Defense attorneys challenged every aspect of my analysis, trying to find flaws in my methodology or gaps in my understanding. But I'd spent months living with these numbers, and I knew them better than I knew my own bank account. Every fraudulent payment, every suspicious cost overrun, every pattern that revealed the scope of Blackstone's criminal enterprise. 2 weeks later, the indictments were unsealed. Richard Blackstone was charged with racketeering, money laundering, fraud, conspiracy, and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder in the deaths of Thomas Chen and Kevin Torres. The indictment detailed a 20-year scheme that had stolen over $40 million from municipal projects while laundering another $60 million in organized crime proceeds. Blackstone's arrest made national news. The corruption case that had started with suspicious cost overruns in a mid-sized city had become a federal investigation that exposed systemic fraud in municipal contracting nationwide. Other cities started reviewing their own construction contracts, finding similar patterns of inflated costs and suspicious payments. The trial lasted 8 months. I testified 3 times, walking jury after jury through the financial evidence that proved Blackstone's guilt. Defense attorneys attacked my credentials, my methodology, my motives for coming forward. They painted me as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, a conspiracy theorist who'd fabricated evidence to support wild theories. But the numbers were unassailable. Bank records, municipal contracts, payment authorizations, cost analyses that showed exactly how the money had flowed from city accounts to criminal organizations through Blackstone's construction projects. Kevin's recordings provided the context, but my research provided the proof. During cross-examination, Blackstone's lead attorney, a silver-haired man who charged $500 an hour to defend white-collar criminals, tried to paint me as incompetent. Mr. Dalton, you're a junior analyst with less than 3 years of experience in municipal auditing. Isn't it possible that you simply misunderstood the complexity of large-scale construction financing? I looked him straight in the eye. Sir, I may be junior, but I can read a balance sheet. When a construction project budgets $2 million for concrete and actually spends $4 million, with the extra $2 million going to a company that doesn't exist, that's not complexity. That's theft. The jury was out for 2 days. When they came back, the foreman stood and read verdict after verdict. Guilty on all counts. 43 separate charges, each one representing another piece of evidence that Kevin Torres had died to preserve. Blackstone showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but I watched his wife in the gallery break down completely. Their children, college-aged kids who'd grown up thinking their father was a respected businessman, sat in stunned silence as they learned the truth about how their comfortable life had been funded. The sentencing hearing took place 3 weeks later. Blackstone was given 35 years in federal prison, effectively a life sentence for a man in his early 60s. 12 other defendants received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. The city recovered $28 million in fraudulent payments, though most of the laundered money was never found. But the victory came with a price that kept growing every day. I couldn't go home. My job at Meridian Analytics was gone, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because my name was too well known now. The apartment I'd lived in for 3 years was under surveillance by people who wanted to know if I'd hidden any evidence the FBI hadn't found. My old life had been erased as completely as if I'd died in that elevator with Kevin Torres. The Witness Protection Program offered me a new identity in Portland. Marcus Dalton would disappear, and I'd become someone else with a different name, a carefully constructed background, and a job that had nothing to do with financial analysis or government contracts. Safe, but forever cut off from everyone I'd ever known. I chose to stay Marcus Dalton and take my chances. The FBI set me up with a job at a consulting firm in Boston that specialized in forensic accounting, government contracts, municipal audits, the same work I'd always done, but now with the knowledge of how dangerous truth-telling could be, how asking the wrong questions about the right people could get you killed. My first case in Boston involved a small city in Massachusetts that was worried about cost overruns on their new library project. The contractor was charging twice the budgeted amount for materials, and the city manager wanted an independent analysis to determine if they were being cheated. I spent 2 weeks reviewing contracts and financial records, and the familiar patterns started emerging. Inflated material costs, payments to subcontractors that didn't seem to exist, change orders that added millions to the project without corresponding changes to the scope of work. It was Blackstone's scheme on a smaller scale, but unmistakably the same methods. The contractor's name was different, the city was different, but the criminal methodology was identical, which meant either this was a coincidence or Blackstone's organization had been bigger than anyone had imagined. Other people had learned his techniques and were applying them in other cities, stealing from taxpayers and laundering criminal money through municipal construction projects. I called Agent Stone immediately. "We have a problem. I'm looking at another case that follows the exact same patterns as Blackstone. Same methods, same types of fraudulent charges, same laundering techniques." She was quiet for a long moment before responding. "How many cases are you reviewing in Boston?" she asked. 7 active municipal audits. Why? Because we've gotten reports from forensic accountants in 12 other cities, all of them finding the same patterns you found in Blackstone's operation. All of them in cities that have had recent construction projects managed by companies with ties to organized crime. The scope of what we'd uncovered was starting to become clear. Blackstone hadn't been operating alone. He'd been part of a network, possibly a franchise system that taught criminal organizations how to steal from municipal governments through fraudulent construction contracts. We'd caught one piece of a much larger puzzle. "I need you to come back to Albany," Agent Stone said. "We're putting together a task force. This is bigger than anyone imagined, and you're the only person who understands the financial methodology well enough to identify all the players." I packed my bags that night, looking around the small apartment I'd lived in for 6 months. Boston had started to feel like home, but apparently my work wasn't finished. There were more Kevin Torres out there, security guards and bookkeepers and municipal employees who'd noticed things that didn't add up. More Thomas Chens asking dangerous questions about suspicious contracts. And somewhere, there were more Richard Blackstones, powerful men who thought their money and connections put them above the law, men who would kill to protect their criminal empires, who would murder anyone who threatened their comfortable lives built on stolen taxpayer money. The drive back to Albany took me past the exit for Kevin Torres' hometown. I'd never met his family, never attended his funeral, but I pulled off the highway anyway and drove to the cemetery where he was buried. His headstone was simple granite with his name, dates, and the inscription, "Devoted husband and father." Nothing about him being a hero, nothing about him saving a stranger's life or exposing corruption that reached the highest levels of government. I stood there in the cold December wind, holding the commendation letter the FBI had given me for my role in the investigation. It was nice paper with an official seal, but it couldn't bring Kevin back. It couldn't undo the heart attack that had killed him in his apartment after he'd spent 23 years faithfully protecting a building owned by criminals. "I'm not done yet," I told his headstone. "There are more of them out there, and I'm going to find them all." The task force operation lasted 18 months and resulted in indictments in 37 cities across 12 states. We found evidence of over $2 billion in fraudulent municipal contracts, all following variations of Blackstone's basic methodology. 43 people were convicted, including 2 state senators, 5 mayors, and 27 construction company executives. But the work changed me in ways I hadn't expected. Every spreadsheet became a potential crime scene. Every cost overrun became evidence of conspiracy. Every municipal employee who reached out for help became someone whose life might be in danger for asking the right questions. I started seeing patterns everywhere, connections that might be coincidence, but could also be criminal conspiracies worth investigating. Kevin Torres was posthumously honored by the FBI for his service to the investigation. His family received the reward money that had been posted for information leading to Blackstone's conviction. It wasn't much compared to losing a husband and father, but it was something. A recognition that he'd died for a reason that mattered. I keep a photo of Kevin on my desk now, next to the commendation I received from the Justice Department for my role in the investigation. Every morning when I sit down to analyze another set of municipal contracts, I remember that data isn't just numbers in spreadsheets. Behind every inflated cost and suspicious payment are real people being robbed by criminals who hide behind expensive suits and political connections. The work is still boring most of the time. Spreadsheets and cost analyses and government forms that would put most people to sleep. But occasionally, I find something that doesn't add up. A pattern that suggests fraud or corruption. And when I do, I think about Kevin Torres, who died to protect evidence that brought down a criminal empire spanning 36 cities and involving over $2 billion in stolen taxpayer money. Sometimes the most important battles are fought with calculators and accounting software, not guns and badges. Sometimes the difference between justice and injustice comes down to a security guard who's willing to risk his pension to save a stranger's life. And sometimes, the only thing standing between criminals and their victims is someone boring enough to spend months staring at spreadsheets until the patterns become clear. I still work late sometimes, analyzing contracts and reviewing financial records in empty office buildings after everyone else has gone home. But now I always take the stairs.